Hello, economics students. Today we're going to be going over the Unit 2 activity. So open up that activity and we'll go and go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen here and we'll take a look at that. Okay, so first let's go ahead and go to where we start answering the questions, and that's what starts on page 5. So you can just go ahead and skip ahead to page 5. Economic data collection and analysis. So GDP, inflation, and unemployment rates can be used to measure the health of an economy and its possible growth. Let's look at some current data. So click your state on the map. So you're going to want to click on this map link right here, and we're going to look at your whatever state you live in. In my case, that's California. So I'm going to click on California. So click your state on the map to find the employment data of your state. Type the relevant employment data in the chart below. So for me, I clicked on California, and so it looks like this when you first open it up, and you just click on whatever state you're from. So in my case, that's California. And you want to look at these things over here, okay? So it's all your data that you want is in this first little section here. So here it says the state you chose. So in our case, that's California. If you chose a different state, that's fine. That is where I live. Okay. Unemployment rate. So for the unemployment rate, you want to look at this row right here. And this row right here. So this current month actually has November 2021. So that's 6.9%. So 6.9%. And over here, you're just going to write what that means. You're going to write the unemployment rate for November 2021 is 6.9%. Okay, so I'm just putting the same information just in a complete sentence. Unemployment rate the month before. So in this case, the month before, that's October 2021, 7.3%. 7.3%. Now, when it comes to unemployment, generally for a healthy economy, you want the unemployment rate to be as low as possible. Basically, you want everyone who's looking for a job to be able to find a job. So again, put what that means in a complete sentence. The unemployment rate for October 2021 is 7.3%. So what's the change in the unemployment rate? It went down, right? So I'm going to put minus. It went down 4%, or sorry, 0.4%, which is good. We want the unemployment rate to go down. Generally speaking, you want it to go all the way down as low as you can get it. And again, here you'd write in a complete sentence what this means. This means that the unemployment rate went down by 0.4%. Now, your numbers might be different depending on when you're doing this assignment or what state you clicked on. But generally, that's what we're doing here, okay? The number employed in the most recent month. So the number employed is, in our case, that's 17,719. And I think it said 0.4. Okay. But actually, this number, when you look at this data, it's important to know that this number is in thousands, okay? This one means that this number is in thousands. So we multiply by 1,000 to get the true value. So that's going to be, so in California, it is 17,719,400 roughly. And that was for November. Now do the same for the October. And you can see that number is a little bit different there. So it was 17,639.5. Since it's in thousands, we'll write like that. Go ahead and add some commas here. Okay. So you can see, yes, it makes sense, right? If the unemployment rate went down, which it did, then the employment rate went up, right? You can see in November, more people were employed than there were people employed in October. All right, so the number of jobs gained, you simply subtract these. So in our case, the number of jobs gained, do I have a calculator here? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to subtract these. So the number of jobs increased by 799,000, 79,900. Okay, which is good. Okay, and again, over here, you're going to just write a one sentence what this data means. Okay, just like how we did here. So for example, the number employed, you would say 17,719,400 people were employed during the month of November. Okay, now again, your numbers may be different depending on when you're doing this assignment. Okay, in my case, I'm using November 2021 and October 2021, but you are going to be using different months depending on when you're doing this assignment. So you're going to have different numbers there. Okay. Economists frequently use the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI, to measure inflation, the general increase in prices. The CPI measures the monthly change in the prices of what typical Americans buy. If the CPI is positive, this means that prices are going up. If it is negative, it means that prices are going down. Now, review the US economic data and type the relevant information in the chart. So CPI, again, measures essentially the price of goods and services that the average American buys. So you want to click on that link, and that should take you to here. So the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is where you want to be looking at right here. And that's when you click on this link right here where it says US economic data. And you want to look at the Consumer Price Index. And so you can see here I have November, I have December, November, October. We're just going to use the December and November here. So for this current month, it's 0.5. I wonder, since I used November and October here, I think maybe I'll just use November and October here. Okay, I would just continue to use whatever 2 months you use in the first problem, just use the same 2 months in all the other problems. So you can see for November, I'm going to use 0.8, October 0.9. So what does this mean? It means the prices for goods and services went up 0.8% in the month of November. Similarly, right here, same thing, you write that for October. Now, these are actually very large numbers. You don't want to see CPIs go up a lot like this. These are actually very large numbers for CPI growth. Generally, inflation is not a good thing for a healthy economy. You want inflation, but not a high level of it. You want your inflation to be basically usually around like 1% to 2% maybe is a general good year over year inflation. But this is 0.8% in just 1 month. That's actually a very high CPI month over month. So just make sure whatever numbers you get, you want to think about that. So these are actually very high numbers for inflation, and hopefully we see those numbers go down in future months, but we don't know, right? So you can see, like, for example, in this sample answer, this sample answer was from quite a while ago, I think like 2013, 2014. And you can see these CPI numbers are much lower than what we're dealing with now. Okay. Find the US data on this list of GDP data. Record the data for the most recent year listed and the year before that is in the table. Note, on this site, the GDP for the last year is also nominal GDP. Nominal GDP does not account for inflation in the year the GDP is earned. Okay, so we want to go to this new link, and that'll take you here. Now, right here, when you look at this data, this is actually giving you the world GDP, the world GDP. And you could see in 2020, that was $84.68 trillion. So what does that mean? That means that that's the amount of the value of all the goods and services that the whole world produced in the global economy. So every time you bought something, or every time something was produced, every time a car was produced, or any service was given. So for example, you bought a haircut, or you went to the doctor, or whatever else. Everything that you bought, everything that's sold goes into this number here. Okay, so this is for the worldwide gross domestic product. Now, we don't want the world, we want just the US. So what you're going to do is you're going to scroll down, and you can see all these GDPs for all these various countries. You're going to want to scroll down all the way down to US, to the United States. So it's all the way towards the bottom. And you can see right here, United States. So go ahead and click on that. And we can see the GDP for just the United States was 20.894 trillion. Okay, 20.894 trillion. Okay, so that's how much this number is. Okay. So this is thousands, millions, billions, trillions. Okay, so this is how much the GDP was for 2020. And so in a sentence over here, you would just say that. So in the year 2020, the GDP for the US was 20894 123 123 123. Okay, so that's an incomplete sentence. And so then we want the year prior to that. So we want to look at 2019 as well. So go back to this and just go over to this point. You can see in 2019, the GDP for the United States was actually higher. You can see there, it's 21.433 trillion. Okay. So this is not really a good sign because honestly, you want to see GDP increasing. You can see the year in 2019, the GDP was actually higher than in 2020. That's not actually a good thing. You want to see GDP increasing year over year. But this isn't that bad because in 2020, we did have that big economic downturn from the pandemic. So it's not that surprising that the GDP went down a little bit, but it didn't go down really a huge amount, right? But you can see from this chart, GDP is generally increasing year over year, and which is generally a good thing for an economy. You can see it's going up year over year over year, except there's this one dip right here, right? That was from, you know what this dip was from? That was when the economy crashed quite a bit and we had that recession when the housing market crashed and it really damaged the economy. So we could see that one dip right here. And then we could see this other dip right here. That's one we're just talking about, which again came from more or less the pandemic and the other economic struggles of 2020. Okay, hope that makes sense. So part D, when comparing GDP from one year to another, you need to adjust each year's GDP for any inflation that occurs during that year. To do this, you need to find real GDP. To find real GDP, or the value of GDP that takes into account any price changes in the period, use this formula. So now we're going to use this to calculate real GDP. Okay, so you found the nominal GDP. We already found that. That's what we did in this problem up here. But you will need to find the value of the deflators before you can use the formula. The price deflators neutralize any inflation that happened that year. Using this table for price deflator data, find the price deflators for gross domestic product for the fourth quarter in the years you use part C to record them. So we want to go to this link now, the price deflator data, and that'll take you to this right here. So you want to make sure, we want quarterly. Okay, so make sure that your data is in quarterly. It should be already, but you should see when you scroll over this curve here, you can see where the data says Q4, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, like that. And we want to use quarter 4 for this question, right? Because it says use the fourth quarter in the years used for part C. So again, we're using 2020 and 2019. So in 2020 and 2019, we want to look for the price deflators in the fourth quarter. So you could see here for 2019 in the fourth quarter, it was 112.978. $12.978. All right. And for 2020, 114.439. Okay. But let's write this in a complete sentence. So in 2020, the deflator value was period. Okay, and then write a complete sentence in for this one as well. Again, depending on when you're watching this video, these numbers might be a little bit different. Part E. Now that you know the nominal GDP and the price deflators, use the formula to find the real GDP for the most recent year and find the year prior. Round your answers to the same significant digits as the corresponding year's nominal GDP and record them in the table. So I'm going to go ahead. We don't want these numbers. We want 2020 and 2019 here. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab this formula. We're going to need that. I'm going to put that over here. Okay. We're also going to need these pieces of data. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this. These are the deflators. And I need those nominal GDPs, which we found up here. Now, once you have this, you could essentially find the real GDP for both years. Okay, so I'm going to go, let's go ahead and do that. So real GDP. Oh, my writing is not the best. That's okay. And then on top here, we're going to do nominal GDP. So in 2020, that was 894,000,000,000,000,000, divided by, and our denominator here, we're going to do 114.439 over 100. So let's figure out what this denominator is first. If you divide that, that's actually going to give you 1.14439. right here. That's our denominator. And then I'm not going to rewrite this, but that's going to go on the numerator, and then you want to divide that. So let's get our calculators out. I don't know if my calculator is going to be able to take on all this. 1.14439. Okay, so our new answer, the real GDP, is going to give us, now your calculator might say 1 point something to the power, and then it has like at the end, like, so it's basically in scientific notation, but this comes out to 18 trillion, 257 billion, 761 million, 780,000. Okay, that's what I got. Now, if your calculator can't handle these big numbers, that's okay. You could always Google a calculator and work on it through that. Okay, but you can see the real GDP is considerably less than the nominal GDP. That's to be expected because the price deflator will actually, it brings down the real GDP because inflation, yada, yada. Okay. Now do that same calculation for this number, and you'll be using this as your deflator. So this was for 2020. So for 2019, I want you to give that a try. Find the real GDP. And you would do that taking this number divided by this number divided by 100. Okay, so go ahead and do that on your own. Again, your value should give you, your real GDP will be less than this nominal GDP. Okay. Okay, so we would put that number we got over here. 18, comma, 57, comma, 761, comma, 780, comma, trillion, billion, million, thousand. You can write this in a complete sentence. The real GDP for 2020 was that, period, and then do the same for 2019. Okay, I'm gonna have to calculate this because I need this number to do the next. So let's see, 1, 4, 3, 3. Okay, that doesn't seem right. Two, 1, 4, 3, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 divided by 1.1297. Okay, so for 2019, I got 18 trillion, 970 billion, 950 million, 100,000. Okay, hopefully you got the same number or something similar. And this number 18, comma, 970, comma, 950, comma, 100, comma, 000. So keep in mind that your numbers might be a little bit different depending on rounding error and some other things. And when you're doing this assignment and whatever. Okay, so these two numbers we got here. Now what we want to do is we want to find the GDP growth. So actually our growth didn't actually grow. It was actually it went down a little bit. So what we're going to do is we do the new GDP minus the old GDP divided by the old GDP. So the new, which in our case was 2020, minus the 2019, and then divided by the 2019. So we're going to subtract the 2020 minus the 2019 and then divided by the 2019. Okay, so our GDP went down by about 3.8%. Percentage rounded to the nearest hundredth. So we'll say it went down 3.76%. Okay. Notice it was a negative number in this case, which makes sense because the new GDP in 2020 was lower than the GDP in 2019. Okay. Keep in mind that that's bad, right? We don't want the GDP to go down. We want it always to go up. Okay. Look again at the websites that you use to complete task one. Which organizations compiled the data that you use? So when we look at these things, notice it's .gov, .gov, .gov. Well, this one's a .org, and this one's a .org, but this is economic research. This is the World Bank. So these seem like all the very good, credible sources. So which organizations compiled the data that you use? So we would say the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the World Bank, and economic research. So you would list those right here. Again, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the World Bank, and economic research were the ones that compiled our data. So write that there. Do you think the organizations could be biased in reporting these numbers? Why or why not? Well, there could be bias, but there's unlikely to be bias because these reports are .gov or other credible sources. So there's unlikely to be number tampering. Usually they just post the numbers and they don't bother to try to interpret them or anything like that. Okay, so could there be bias? Yes, but it's unlikely to have bias because, again, these sources are credible and some of them are even .gov. Okay. What do you think can be done to prevent bias in economic data reporting? So some ways to eliminate bias or try to prevent bias is to have multiple sources looking at the data. So use data from multiple sources and have multiple organizations interpreting the data. We could also say have the data, these people that are organizing the data, some of them should be from different political parties. So in the US, the two main political parties are the Democrats and the Republicans. For cases like this, it might be a good idea to have some Democrats and some Republicans both part of the same team when it comes to reporting this data. That way they don't try to skew it one way or make it look one way and not another. Okay, so that's another thing we could put here. So have people from different political parties interpreting and reporting on the data. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so predicting economic activity. So we looked at a bunch of data, all right? Having economic data is good for historical knowledge, but it is also essential to attempt to predict future economic activity. Based on the information you found in task 1, compose a 200 to 300 word essay that predicts what you think will happen to the economy in the next year. Use at least 5 statistics you recorded in task 1 to justify your answer. So again, you want to be using the information that we just found to help you write here. You can talk about how the GDP has gone down from one year to the next. That's usually a bad sign for an economy. We'll see what happens when the reporting comes in for 2021. But we could see from 2019 to 2020, the GDP went down, which is bad. We could also look at the CPI, right? The Consumer Price Index. And those numbers were actually really high, which is bad. We don't want to see inflation. That means your dollar is losing value. So those inflation rates have been really bad. In fact, the most recent data from December 2021 showed a 7% year-over-year inflation, which is extremely bad. It hasn't been that high since like the early 80s. So that's really, really bad. That means that your dollar lost 7% of its purchasing power in just 1 year. So that's bad. And if inflation continues to go up, this could be really bad for our economy. But we do want to also look at employment rates. So employment rates have gone up, at least in California where we looked. It might be a good idea to look at the whole nationwide and see how the unemployment rate is going. Okay, so what you want to write is use that data to try to say whether the economy is going to get better in the coming years or whether it's going to get worse in the coming years. Again, you want to be using the data we found from the previous couple pages, about the GDP, the CPI, and unemployment. So go ahead and pause and go ahead and use that. 200 to 300 words, it's not very much. See, it's pretty small. It's not that much. Just a couple paragraphs explaining what the data is telling you and tell me whether you think the economy is going to get better or worse. Okay. Now, once you have that, you should be able to answer what's coming up in this next page. In this task, you will combine what you found for unemployment data in task 1 with what you learned in the tutorial about production possibility curves to create a PPC. The PPC is a production possibility curve on the graph below. Sketch a hypothetical production possibility curve. Use your interpretation of the current unemployment data to place a point on the graph that represents where the U.S. economy might currently be in terms of output of goods and services. Okay. So generally with a PPC, we're going to draw this curve right here. So just kind of draw this curve right here. And when you're drawing your PPC, the one thing to keep in mind is you can't be to the right of this curve. So you can't put any point over here because a point over here means you're producing more than you can possibly produce. So this is like if you maximize production perfectly, you would be on this curve. So chances are your economy is going to be inside over here. If your economy is going poorly, you're going to be more on this side, probably not this far, but over here. If your economy is doing well, you're going to be very close to being on the line. Okay, so we don't have to get too crazy, but let's just say the economy is currently here. Okay, and that's good enough. That's fine. For this next one, again, we're going to draw the same PPC. So again, like this. Okay, I might have drawn it a little bit different here. Doesn't really matter. And again, here's where we're going to put our current economic situation. Now, if you think the economy is going to get better, then we want to put our next piece of data. It says here, let's go and read part B. Now, think about your prediction you made in task 3 and generally illustrate your prediction on the PPC graph you drew in part A. Draw the elements on the graph. First, draw the curve, then plot a circle to represent the initial PPC production point and a square to represent the new amount of production. So if you, in that essay you wrote on the previous page, if you predicted the economy is going to do better, then you want to draw the square closer to the curve. So it went from here to here, which means the economy is getting better. Now, if you think the economy is going to get worse, you want to draw the square farther away from the curve, like here. Okay, so depending on what you argued in the previous essay, that's going to determine where you draw your square. Okay, if you think the economy is going to do better, we want to draw the square closer to the PPC. If you think the economy is going to do worse in the coming years, we want to draw the square farther away from the PPC. Okay? All right. Well, I hope that all made sense. If you have any questions, please comment below, and I'll try to answer what I can. Anyway, hope you have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time.